Hello everyone, my name is Alyssa and I'll be your MC and moderator today. Welcome to our webinar, following up on difficult employee engagement survey results. Before we begin today's webinar, I'd like to run through some housekeeping details. The lines will be muted for the duration of the webinar. If you have questions, please submit them using the Q&A box and we will do our best to answer all questions at the end of the webinar during the Q&A session. We'll be recording today's session and everyone will receive a copy of the presentation and recording afterwards. Do allow me to take a moment to introduce our panel speakers for today. Dr. Stephen Chu leads a team of solution architects who work exclusively with Korn Ferry's large complex clients throughout APAC. His team serves as resident expert on Korn Ferry's integrated product offerings of reward, talent, leadership, and engagement to ensure its clients achieve maximum value and sustainable success when using Korn Ferry's unique range of products and solutions. Next up, Dr. Brent Roach is an expert in measurement-driven organizational change, employee engagement, and human capital strategy. He has worked with senior teams in 20 countries across 5 continents to design customized measurement systems, diagnose issues, and develop strategies for improving organizational performance. Last but not least, our guest speaker, Nikolai Jensen, has more than 20 years of experience working with business leaders on global business transformations and organization redesign to culture journey management in consulting, FMCG, and medtech companies. He has intensive and in-depth culture understanding, working across 40 different geographies in Americas, EMEA, and APAC. And without further ado, I will now turn it over to Dr. Stephen Chu.
Thank you, Ellie. Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, my name is Stephen Chu. I'm the Vice President of Solution Design, APAC at Korn Ferry. It's great to address an important topic with you all and how to best deal with difficult employee engagement feedback with my colleague Brent and also our client Nikolai Jensen from Sivantos Group at our Korn Ferry webinar today. Right. Now, most of you on this call would probably know us by different names, Executive Search, Hey Group, or Future Step. And moving ahead, we are taking a more unified approach by bringing together the collective power of Korn Ferry, the enterprise, rather than individual lines of business. This new strategy reflects our commitment to offer our clients a unique value proposition. Today, the challenge for any leader is harmonizing strategy with talent. And that is what we're building, a firm that has the unique expertise to synchronize your organization's strategies and talent to help you drive superior performance with the following key solutions. Our organizational strategy, which looks into strategic solutions for dynamic growth. Our next assessment and solution provides insight on the talent you have, the talent you need, and how to close the gaps. We also have talent acquisition that helps you to recruit the best talent to execute your strategies. Leadership development enables you to develop your leaders to successfully grow your business. And last but certainly not least, rewards and benefits to help you to best reward, motivate, and incentivize your people to achieve high performance. We have been partnering with our clients, some of whom are world's most admired companies, on developing an employee engagement culture to achieving high performance for the past 40 years. Now, our clients have chosen to continue working with us because of our following strengths: our state-of-the-art online survey technology, our over 100 robust global benchmarks, advanced analytics to link employee insights to performance outcomes, and our extensive global footprint of local offices with dedicated survey consultants in more than 50 countries around the world. And our global clients come from a variety of different industries across APAC, several of which are displayed on this slide. To show you the diversity and dynamism of our database, I'm sure you recognize a number of major iconic brands such as Vodafone, Mitsubishi, UBS, Oracle, L'Oreal, Visa, and others. And besides working with global MNCs, we also work with numerous large national clients in each of our 12 key markets across APAC as well. Now, let's get started on talking about employee engagement. The many organizations today are focused on measuring and enhancing levels of employee engagement. It's easy to see why. Having committed employees who support organizational values and consequentially exert extra discretionary effort willingly can certainly make a difference in success. However, as we have been conducting employee survey research for the past 40 years, we learned that achieving better business results isn't as simple as improving employee engagement. In fact, we have encountered numerous situations in which high levels of engagement did not translate into the higher levels of performance that our clients were seeking. Our research led us to a vital missing link in many engagement programs: employee enablement. Defined as the ability to be productive at work, enablement comes from having the right tools, the resources, and training for employees, as well as effectively leveraging their skills and talent and allowing the right level of autonomy. Now, employees can be engaged, but if they aren't enabled, their contribution to positive outcomes will always be limited. So by pioneering the inclusion of employee enablement in survey programs, our validated engaged performance framework has therefore been adopted by hundreds of companies around the world. So it certainly pays to have employees who are not only engaged, but also enabled to achieve greater business and people results. As illustrated on the right side of this slide, our framework also creates a profile of your workforce and categorizes employees into 4 distinct segments depending on their levels of engagement and enablement. Now, we can identify employees who are both highly engaged and well-enabled for success, known as most effective, where motivation to contribute is matched with a strong ability to be successful. Employees are likely to be your high achievers. Now, unfortunately, however, we also regularly find a set of employees lacking on both dimensions. Where both engagement and enablement are missing, employees are understandably likely to struggle in their job roles and become what we call less effective. The real power of our framework comes in calling attention to the frustrated and detached groups of employees on the bottom right corner and top left corner of the table respectively. Now, all too often, many firms work hard in hiring talent who are enthusiastic about making a difference. But these new hires become increasingly frustrated by roles that do not suit them or work environments that get in their way. And at the same time, there are also many organizations that have made huge investments in improving their employees' productivity, but have unfortunately dropped the ball in engaging them emotionally, therefore leading to them feeling detached over time. As shown on this graphic, it's important to have lots and lots of employees who not only want to perform, but also able to act on their intentions as well. This combination has been found to produce a multiplier effect of between 2 and 5 times when linking to performance. For example, firms with highly engaged employees are found to achieve a 2.5 times greater revenue growth. However, these same firms achieve a staggering 4.5 times greater revenue growth when they have employees who are both highly engaged and highly enabled. In summary, by adopting our engaged performance framework in your survey program, it will significantly increase the likelihood of your organization reaching its strategic goals by creating dramatically better business outcomes, more loyal talent, more satisfied customers, and better financial performance. For those of you who have experience in conducting employee engagement surveys in your organization, one real challenge we all face is how do you deal with difficult employee feedback? So Brent, based on your many years of survey research experience, How do we best deal with this problem effectively?
Thanks, Stephen. What I hope to show here in the next few slides is a really practical way of dealing with difficult employee feedback. We all have seen situations where the survey goes out, it's promoted, the whole organization is involved, the senior management is watching, all the employees are watching, and then the results come back and it points to difficult situations. So what I want to do is cover a very practical way of dealing with difficult employee feedback. So we'll touch on some examples along the way and show you some very concrete areas where difficult employee feedback might come up. So usually what happens when a survey kicks off, the organization, spends a lot of time trying to communicate, with the survey vendor about, understanding their organization, understanding their industry, and building a survey with the right kinds of questions, so you target the right kinds of issues. Then there's a lot of effort that goes into collecting the employee responses and opinions, the communications going out, tracking of employees, trying to determine which departments are participating and which aren't. And then once all the data are in there, there's a lot of effort that goes into analyzing the data, looking at statistical results, breaking down the data into smaller units, all of that. And then in the end, what we try to do is boil it down to, these are the top 2 or 3 issues that are high leverage areas for the organization to be able to move their people forward in terms of engagement and enablement. But what I want to focus on here is the effective follow-up. And again, if the issues are difficult, then what does an organization do? Now, there are a couple of different classes of difficult employee feedback that I want to cover. 2 of them are around talent, and 2 others are around resources. There may be other types of difficult feedback that come in, but these are the main classes that we want to deal with because they're probably the most frequent ones that come up. Around the talent side, top leadership can be a very difficult subject to deal with. So just imagine yourself, you conduct a survey, and then the number 1 issue area that comes back as an opportunity to improve is people are saying in the survey that they don't have trust in the leadership, or that they don't have confidence in the direction that the company's going or its strategy. That sort of thing can be very difficult because then it falls back to the HR people to try to deal with that, and going back to your leadership and saying, hey, there's something wrong in the job that you're doing, that can be a tough sell. So they're naturally going to ask some questions. So we want to cover some of that in our examples. Career development can also be a difficult issue on the talent side, and for different reasons. Careers are difficult. They're complex issues to deal with, and there's a lot going on in careers, in terms of individuals and how the organization is dealing with it. In the organization and its structure can come into this. But one of the reasons that it's very difficult for HR professionals is because usually the fingers are pointed back at HR and saying, hey, what are you doing about careers? As if HR can do everything about it. We want to give you some methodology for dealing with that too. Staffing can also be difficult, on the resource side, because staffing is a business level decision. So, it affects the cost structure of the business and the performance of the business, profitability. And so, when people come back and they say staffing is an issue, a lot of times when, people are working harder and there's more complexity in their job, the first thing that they ask for is staffing. So there are going to be a lot of questions around that. Pay is also a difficult one for similar reasons to staffing. It's a business decision. Pay can represent 30 to 60% of operating costs for a business. So any moves that are made around pay can be very expensive, and HR may not have control over those kinds of decisions. It's usually a business decision. So we want to cover some on pay also. So let me cover a methodology for dealing effectively with difficult employee feedback. The main things that you want to do is address the objectivity of the results, the localization, the specificity, and then return on investment. When you talk about objectivity, oftentimes when survey results come back, some people in the organization can say, well, that's just the opinions of people. That's just their feelings. What does that have to do with the business? So what you wanted to do is build the strongest business case by getting objective, concrete information that's beyond people's opinions on a survey. Opinions are perfectly valid data, but you also want to back it up with some objective, concrete data to go along with it to sort of triangulate and convince the leadership, and not only the leadership, but the employee population as a whole, that you have a real issue and that you've really narrowed it down. The localization is, where is the issue happening? So if you're surveying the whole organization, there may be some specific parts that have more issues than others, or issues to a greater degree than others. You want to localize it, narrow it down, so you can go back and look at the overall scope and scale of the issue. And specificity. Specificity here, what I'm talking about is when you look at an issue like leadership or pay, there's a lot going on in the concept of leadership. It has to do with creating a vision. It has to do with communication. It has to do with execution. It has to do with bringing along the organization in terms of all of its resources, communicating with investors. There are many things that go on in leadership. So what you want to do is narrow it down and not go back to your leadership and say, there's a leadership issue, but say, hey, there's a communication issue, or there's a problem with execution, or there's a problem with communicating back to your people in very specific ways. Same thing goes with pay. Pay can be very broad. There's total remuneration, but when you look at total rewards, that has to do with your base pay, your bonus pay, and other organizational factors that come into it, some fringe benefits, those kinds of things. So you want to narrow it down, and when you go back to your management, be very specific about that. The return on investment is fairly obvious, and if you've done the first three in getting objective information that's localized and specific, the return on investment is easier to calculate, but it's always good to go back to your leadership with some idea about the cost to the business if you don't fix it, and how much the investment will be in order to move forward and try to address it. So the basic principles of dealing with difficult employee feedback is, first, separate the perception from the reality by being very specific about where it's happening, what's happening, who's it happening to, and narrow things down and be very specific about it. The next part is to make a business case. So do a cost-benefit analysis, make a strong business case, get some financial metrics for the cost to the business if you don't fix it, and how much it will be in order to address that problem. And then it's really about, once you put those together, aligning your stakeholders. And if you've done your homework up to that point and you've covered the first two about separating perception from reality and making a business case, aligning your stakeholders should be a lot easier. So let me show you some examples of dealing with difficult talent issues. One of the best places to start to localize where an issue is taking place is built right into your employee engagement reporting system. So you see in this example, what we call the internal benchmark tool, and they're specifically looking at issues of confidence in leadership. You can see the ones that are circled in red there are the ones that are statistically significantly below the overall company. So you can easily find out department by department, function by function, business unit by business unit, where the issues are taking place. And once you know that, then it's a lot easier to go back to leadership, go back to employees themselves and say, these are the ones that we want to focus in on. You notice that there are some in this slide that are shaded green too. If you see a lot of green in a column, that indicates that that's a real strength area for that particular unit. You can use those as sources of best practice to go back and address the ones that are shaded in red. Another way to narrow things down by making them more specific is to look at the open-ended comments in the survey. And we have a way of kind of drilling down and filtering out the comments. So in this example, we often ask a very constructive kind of open-ended comment about, you know, what are the one or two things that you would do to improve the organization. So what that's doing is filtering out for people answering that question on how to improve specifically. Then you can further filter, and in this example, we're using career as an example. You can find each of the survey questions that were asked in the survey and look for the ones that are under career if you're addressing career. And then you can further drill down and say, let's find out the improvement suggestions from people that answered the career question in the negative. And then it will just filter out the results for you. You can get some very good ideas for the, you know, about improvement from the people that are scoring career low. It won't always give you the answer that you're looking for in every single comment, but you'll get some grains of truth out of it, and you'll find some that are addressing that specifically. So that's another good place to try to make things more specific. Now, this is an example of dealing with top leadership issues. So let's say you've already found out which leaders have issues from your survey results, and then what you do is one way to address that is to go in and do a 360-degree survey for some of the leaders that are scoring lower. Just in this example, you can see in the left-hand panel, we use a 9-box approach here, where we put into a matrix by the importance to the job, and these are looking at specific leadership competencies, the importance to the job versus that leader's skill in those competencies. So in the top right-hand box there, that's the leader's strength areas, where they have high competence in areas that are important to their jobs as leaders. If you go to the top left-hand box, then that's addressing areas that are important to the job where the leader has low skill areas. So those would be the opportunities for follow-up. And in the right-hand panel, it just shows you, and I know that this is very small print here, but it's just showing you that you can compare it to benchmarks with other leaders, and you can get an idea within the report about how much room you could potentially improve to get up to speed with other leaders who've been measured. Another very comprehensive way that's more comprehensive to deal with top leadership issues is to put them through a leadership development program. And often there's some pre-work that goes into that, and 360-degree surveys are usually part of that, including other measures that you might take. Then there's the actual program where there's learning that goes on and experiential exercises going on and feedback, and it's very rich. This is just an example of one program that we have, but there are many others that can be designed specifically to address certain types of issues. And then there's the post work that involves getting feedback and oftentimes getting coaching, individualized coaching, to challenge leaders on their competencies, on their specific behaviors. And that's a good way to kind of move the behavioral needle over for leaders. Now, changing gears a little bit, in order to deal with career and development issues, we often use success profiles as a starting point. A success profile, for those of you that are not so familiar, is a way of determining high performance for a particular job. So it's job focused, and what we've done is we've done a series of interviews with high performers only in order to determine the competencies, the experiences, the traits, and the drivers that would make people most successful in that position. Now, the reason that that's good for dealing with career issues is if we know what high performance looks like within a particular job, then we can do some assessment to measure people. And you can see in this slide, this is just a high-level view of that kind of assessment. So what you're looking for is fit in terms of competencies, traits, and drivers in a particular position. And then you can address where the gaps are, where people underuse a particular competency or overuse that competency. Maybe they don't have the traits in terms of their personality to fit with that kind of job, and you can address those, or the drivers that would motivate a person towards succeeding in that kind of job. So you can look at those gap areas. You can also refer to benchmarks for other people that have been assessed in a similar position in order to find out how much it's going to take for you to move your particular competencies to match with that job well. Now, the success profiling can be used for a variety of reasons. The ones with stars here are related to careers and development. So if you want to do, somebody in a specific job, let's say they're new to the job, you can assess them on their own job and find out where the gap areas are, and then help them to get training experiences that would bring them up to snuff within that particular job. You can also, if somebody has been in their job for a while, you can look at the next level up and find out what's it going to take for you to get to the next level and be a high performer at the next level. Okay, so I've been dealing with the talent kinds of issues. I want to hand back to Stephen to talk about dealing with difficult pay issues. So Stephen, could you tell us some about this?
Oh, thank you, Brent. Thanks a lot for that. So how do you deal with difficult pay issues? Now, in surveys, pay is one area that most employees are not generally happy about. Let's face it, when asked about pay, no one in their right mind would say he or she is overpaid. This is why it's important to compare your employees' perception of whether they are paid fairly to external benchmarks to really get a meaningful perspective. Now, rather than dismissing pay inequity as always, it's not real, it's just perception, we need to address this highly charged and emotional area holistically. Our total reward concept emphasizes the importance of considering all aspects of reward as one integrated entity. Each of the elements of total reward, namely base pay, pay contingent on performance, discretionary bonus, employee benefits, and non-financial rewards, which include intrinsic rewards from the employment environment and work itself, are all linked together. So to truly tackle this contentious pay issue, it's best to approach reward holistically and not rely on one or two reward mechanisms operating in isolation. Now, we need to take account of all the ways in which people can be rewarded and obtain satisfaction through their work. One other useful data point to address employee feedback on pay is, the external reward benchmarking. Now, I'm sure several of you subscribe to our pay database called PayHub, and for those of you who have heard it for the first time, PayHub is our innovative and interactive online pay database platform. As you can see on this slide, within the PayHub, there are a number of reports that can provide you further insight into how you can better deal with your employees' pay perception. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll just highlight two. The first is Reward Health Check. This report offers an internal equity analysis. It looks at how your company's practice compares to the internal pay policy. It offers competitiveness analysis per job family. It highlights gender differences, which is very important these days, and linked of the performance and reward. Next is the Total Reward Diagnostic. Now, this report looks at the overall reward alignment. It analyzes differences between the current reward and optimal reward practices based on collecting further opinion from your managers and employees separately. Another useful analysis that you might want to consider to determine if your employees' perception on their pay inequity is true is to undertake what we call a reality check. Now, this is best done by comparing your employees' perceptive data from your employee survey against actual market pay data from, let's say, our PayHub. Now, as this 2x2 matrix demonstrates, you can take the appropriate tailor-made actions to address the different pay issues at each of the quadrants depending on the level of match or mismatch between the perceived and the actual pay data. Let me just take you through. For example, when perceived and actual pay are considered equally high, it's best to reinforce the positive message of rewarding these talents competitively and well as future leaders on the top right corner of the matrix. And when pay perception is lower than the actual pay reality, it's important to provide more clearer communication to correct the misguided pay perception to those affected employees on the bottom right corner. Now, this may seem odd, but when pay perception is higher than pay reality, one might conclude that no action is required to be taken. However, it's still necessary to make adjustments to the pay structure of those high performers and high potentials to reduce flight risks on the top left corner. And finally, when pay perception and reality are equally low, it's critical to take immediate action to adjust the pay against market for those employees you like to retain, found on the bottom left corner. So we've talked a lot so far about how you can deal with difficult employee engagement, feedback on leadership, talent, and pay. Now, these post-survey actions are critical to ensuring the long-term success of your employee engagement efforts. So, Brand, what are the key considerations we all need to think about when implementing action planning following our next survey effectively?
Thanks, Stephen. This is really just a recap at this point. Some of the things that you really want to do is make sure that you've localized where the issue is happening. Of course, when you look at the overall employee feedback, you want to pick those big areas to address, but then you want to start to drill down and find out where the issues are the worst, where there are sources of potential strengths that you can tap in on best practices from various groups who are doing better on these. So localize it down, find out specifically which groups. The other part is to narrow the issue down. So again, for things like leadership, what aspect of leadership is the issue? It's going to make things a lot easier to address in the end. It's going to also make things easier to go back to your leadership, and then it ultimately will make it easier to go back to your employee population and say, you know, we have an issue around leadership communication. That's much easier to address than just say we have a leadership issue. The other part too is to make sure that you've separated employee perceptions from objective realities. So you can do that in several ways. You can get some more data, as we've shown you in some of these examples. You can go back to focus groups. You can talk to people and find out what's going on there. You can look at objective data that you may already have, things like your performance appraisals, things like unit performance. So, you know, if you see that there's an issue with your employee enablement, and you also see that for those units that have enablement issues, they have lower overall productivity or sales or whatever other objective data you can have, it makes a lot better business case for you. And then finally, look at the return on investment. So try to make a good, strong business case and put some numbers behind it. You may have to make some assumptions, excuse me, within your business case, but as long as you're very transparent about the assumptions that are being made, and you do your math correctly, then that's going to make things a lot easier to get done from a business perspective. All right, so with that recap, I want to hand back to Stephen to introduce our esteemed guest speaker.
Great, thanks, Brent. We are very, very glad to have Nikolai Jensen, who is SVP HR and Chief Human Resource Officer of Sivantos Group, joining us as our guest speaker. And Nikolai,
thank you, Stephen.
Great, Nikolai.
Yes,
it's
just
great.
checking.
Good. Great. That you that you joined us. I just thought that for those in the participants who are not familiar with Sivantos Group, if you could just very quickly tell us what the business is all about.
Yeah, let me give you a little bit of highlight. So Sivantos Group is basically the third biggest hearing aid manufacturer in the world. We do employ 6,500 people globally. We have a global turnover of 1.1 billion euro, EBITDA margin of around 25, so quite profitable business. And of course, we are located in 25 countries, exporting to 150, but I think in total we are located actually with an office location in 25. And we have our global headquarters in Singapore, which of course gives us, you can say, also the footprint in Asia that needs to be our biggest zone of expansion. High level, our business is 40% of our revenue comes from the US and North America, Latin America, 40% from Europe, and 20% from Asia, which is the growing market in hearing aids. And what we do is basically reinventing the miracle of hearing for people who are hearing impaired. So in practical terms, it means that we are producing hearing aids and fitting them to patients at the end of the day as one of the soft medical interventions you can do, or non-medical interventions that requires a lot of you can say, it's quite, I would say, low-end operational. You can say it doesn't require an intervention physically with an operation at a hospital, but you can actually go and get fitted in several locations. So that's our, you can say, nature of the business, very essentially. And of course, with the size of business we're running, we also have a lot of employees in many different locations impacted by employee satisfaction and engagement.
Great. Thanks, Nikolai, for that. I mean, it's a remarkable growth story. I wonder if we could start off by you telling us about, the employee engagement journey that Sivantos has been on over the last 2 to 3 years.
I can, Stephen. So let me, for those of you who doesn't have a little bit of history with the company, very shortly we carved out from Siemens medical devices or medical 3.5 years ago, where the company were bought by a private equity fund. At that time, you can say our job was to, build a new business and basically make it independent out of Siemens, making sure it would actually operate and work effectively. You can imagine a lot of change and a lot of efficiencies being looked for in the whole journey of this. A lot of new tools, a lot of new processes, a lot of new technologies being invested in, and at the same time also transforming the business from being quite, local to being global with the big operational hubs in Asia, so production in Singapore, production in China. In that setup, of course, our engagement journey started also that it's an essential recipe for success. If you have happy employees, you have high performance. And our journey started with that we internalized from having a quite comprehensive Siemens model for employee engagement. We internalized it and started to do it ourselves. What we realized quite quickly was that it's a really cumbersome piece of work requiring a lot of technical, understanding and also statistical understanding. That's often very rare and hard to find in HR. So we took a decision to basically bring it back in and also bring in a vendor that could support us on this. So we had some real facts and the ability to benchmark data and actually work with this based on a proven model. So that's a little bit of the story. And we're now on our next journey step, which means another, merger with another Danish company, the number 5 in the industry, which brings us very close to number 2. So the change and the engagement will be constant for sure, and this is really important for us to bring, engaged employees to the table here. So this is the focus for now, and then just to answer that question, it's a journey now in the last 3 years, but it will continue to be a high focus area for all of us in the management team and global executive board.
Yes, great. Nikolai, it's a great privilege to have worked with you over the last year or so, and maybe you could tell us about with the journey. Just continuing with that question about because I understand that you used to do the survey in-house, and what made you progress from conducting a survey in-house to working with Korn Ferry on the external survey partner?
I mean, for us, it was a lot about the facts and getting real data to support what we needed to make people decisions on. We did some really thin data models, I think, when we started doing it ourselves using the tools that are available for that, a la SurveyMonkey, etc. For sure, it can bring you some steps ahead, but what really was the key thing here was to have a strong consulting team on the other side that has seen what good looks like, have the experience also analyzing a lot of data, knowing what really is, the trends in what they see also in our data. And I think at the end of the day, also the tools available. I think the technology platforms that we have used this year has been significantly helping our work in terms of analyzing the data and also making it a lot easier for us. So, I mean, total time spent, as Brent also said, I mean, the business case here for us, when we looked at if you just look at the salaries we were paying people to do the data crunching and analysis and surveying, that amount of money that we spend on that basically covers what we are paying today for getting the services. So it wasn't a bad decision, but it also helps us get the independent view, which I think is important. Besides that HR can do the work, I think it's also adding to that credibility of data that comes in from this side.
Great, Nikolai. So following your last survey results, what were some of the areas that Sivantos has been focusing on improving so far?
So when you come from a very organized organizational structure like Siemens, and you have had a long history and pride building the brand in people's minds, becoming independent basically was a quite hard disruption for a lot of people that were still employed in the company. So we basically had to bring in a lot of sense of belonging, get people realigned with that they actually mattered for the company journey we were on, that we can get the corporate identity back. I mean, the culture was suffering big time when we started this journey. And I think, I mean, we also lacked a lot of ownership from you can say, the actions and the plans that we put in place by the managers, because they felt a little bit disconnected, like left alone from Siemens. And then what is then the new company identity? Some made purposes work, and then we started actually a lot of work on this. But I think we started building that step by step. But I think if you can classify it, we had a classical identity crisis as an organization and as a company, where part of the culture, it wasn't lost, but it was kind of a new beginning, and looking forward from that was difficult for a lot of the people in the organization. So I think if you say that what were really the most focused area that we looked at, it was really increase the sense of belonging and build or rebuild new corporate identity.
Great, okay. And, maybe for the interest of our participants, could you just share with us perhaps one or two kind of a big, ticket items that you have done to bring about, those improvements?
Yeah, I think what we started with, I think, was maybe we took a couple of steps back, because what I see the engagement survey as is basically a tool for is also the ability to talk about culture and culture change. And then coming from, you can say, a strong background of consulting as well, my purpose was also to get under the skin of the leadership, to get them to own the journey we were on as a company. So you can say it was around lack of facts and lack of understanding of how the old past and how the new future could be made up with some additional observations and concerns and comments from the organization. So what we did was we gathered the leadership team and talked a lot about what does our current company actually feel and look like in the eyes of ourselves, our managers, and our employees. And we discussed essentially also what we wanted it to look like. And some of these wanted to look like, it gave us some, you can say some areas of where we could actually focus, and that became a kickoff on our new culture, which we call Sivantos 2.0, which is a little bit, you can say, outdated already now. But we worked a lot on this and tried to describe our new cultural manifest, and I also tried to get people to believe in the journey we were on. I mean, carving out from a very famous company and becoming independent has been a huge challenge. And I guess we launched our latest mantra, which is I believe, I belong, I matter to Sivantos. So a very employee-centered sentence and mantra. We tried really also to build some of the focus areas that we also really wanted to get out of the whole, you can say, both our survey but also our culture journey, was around creating a modern medtech company. So we basically revamped the whole identity of the company and also built it into a new, you can say, new headquarter, and we rebuilt it 10 new offices, basically trying to display our new, you can say, culture. And it all goes back to how we collaborate, how we make things transparent, how we become more entrepreneurial and independent of how we used to think. And making those decisions. So it's all about autonomy and also creating the link to the engagement survey where we can actually measure the follow-up and see some of these bits and pieces of the change narrative and culture narrative we have started to take, which gives us some touch points to basically discuss, are we on the right track? Are we doing the right things per location? Do we have the right story? Every location has a different narrative of change they go through and are different stages of their change cycle. But for us, that was really, I mean, we've really intensified communication. We've done a lot on social media, so ramping up and implementing Yammer platforms, new intranet platforms, using Teams. I mean, trying to leverage the technology that's available to make people feel that they are part of something bigger and create that community feel again. And then part of these checkpoints we built into the survey. And I think that became a quite essential part of also how we want to follow up. And it's easy to kind of go back and do the math on the business case because, I mean, we had a lot of prisoners of change. I mean, that people that wanted to stay in the old mantra rather than moving into the new. And we spent some time identifying them both in terms of mapping them on the engagement surveys, but also you can see them, you know who they are, and it's working with them or also convincing them that maybe it's time to leave. So this has also been part of the journey so far. And I would say it's never done with just 2 or 3 years down the road. I think it takes longer time to really significantly change the culture. But I do believe that we have made some new believers and some new change champions that actually can step change where we are going. So this is really positive trending, and I would say also with some easy tools to use for following up on it, which gives us directional sense, are we actually mapping and tracking according to what we had said. So a very important step, I would say.
No, Nikolai, thanks for sharing that. I mean, I've really got the last question to ask you before we go to our Q&A. I mean, I hear a lot about, you mentioning change. Change is a big part, of, your journey to transform the organization culture. Just for the participants, could you just share with us perhaps what are 1 to 2 kind of, critical building blocks to bring about successful change, for you? What would that be?
I think if you, we have invested a lot in change training and change readiness. So, I mean, maybe it's not that comparable, but we've educated employees on what does change mean, what does change do to you, how do you act in change curve, classical tools of behavior change, but very, you can say, offered to employees as kind of awareness training. And then we've given a lot of leaders the ability to go through, managing change, how do you manage and lead change? And then we've had our senior leadership teams going through how do you navigate and, you can say, direct change, so basically more leadership perspective on change and how you carve that out and make it work. I think that has helped us tremendously get a common language. And now when I say change narrative and I say change champions and I say change curve, it's so much easier to have the discussions and discuss, you can say, reaction patterns. So for me, it's really about having a story to tell. Where are we going? Where did we come from? I think it's a quite important part of the identity of any organization. But if you take that and then start building with the senior leadership, really trying to craft the culture, I think you can push some of it in the right direction, but you also have to let the leaders jump in and navigate it as well. So this has been, I think, the learnings to really get the leadership at the top in, get them to feel they own the change in the direction of the company. Getting people informed and trained, I think, has been critical. So if you add those components up, it also probably tells you that when we start going into the details of an engagement survey, there's a lot of interest and desire to understand, but also to try to get it to become better. And at the end, our purpose is really to create a company that has that motivating culture where people do believe and they do matter and they do belong to the journey we are on. So that's really critical also for how we now start to craft that out.
Yes, Nikolai, what I'm hearing is that, there's so many critical moving pieces to this, bring about a successful change within the organization. You've got the senior leaders, you've got the employees, managers, and also you have the change agents as well. And all these have to work in sync and together to bring about this change successfully. So thanks for that, Nikolai. It's great sharing on your part. I would like to pass the last session to Ellie to take us through the Q&A session. So over to you, Ellie.
Thank you, Stephen. And thank you, panelists. We will now start the Q&A session. If you have not already, please add your question to the Q&A box in the control panel. So first question that we have from the floor is, what should we do if we have made a strong business case, but our management still do not want to move forward?
I think I'll jump in on that one, Alan. That can happen sometimes, where you've narrowed things down, you've localized them, you've been very specific, you've made a business case, but then leadership just doesn't want to move forward. I think a couple of ways of dealing with that would be, number one, find out exactly what their concerns are. Is it a cost issue? Is it a culture issue? Is it leadership or capability issue? So you can better address their overall concerns. I think the other thing is is, go back to your numbers and look at your assumptions and find out whether or not you've made the strongest possible case, for addressing the issue, and it's going to be a matter of doing your homework, following up, being very specific, and being honest about your assumptions. Maybe your assumptions are wrong, and you've got to be able to kind of reverse course as necessary and go back. And I think that that all of that involves an open dialogue with your senior management to make sure that you've addressed exactly what they need and that you've done it in a credible way that addresses the business.
Can I add a little bit, Brent, to this? This is Nikolai. Just
please
to supplement that. I did pitch this to both my current leadership team, but also in my old leadership team in Carlsberg Group, where I was globally responsible for this. And I would say what convinced our CEO was, of course, when we tried to tell him the correlation results between engagement and performance, that can convince some CEOs and say, okay, performance comes and then engagement comes, or the other way around. But what we really came into deep discussions on were when you start to talk about what's the impact of demotivated and disengaged employees. This is where you will get most of the people, and basically they will back you up on this with the facts as well. From Korn Ferry has the numbers. If you look at this is really the part that gets most CEOs, because it's a matter of that value of disengagement cost a lot of money. And you would also see it on your absence rates and on your, if you run a warehouse like we do, people will steal from you eventually if they're disengaged, or they will manipulate the results to make them look good. This is not what we want, but in reality it helps to support it. So this would be my advice as well. Talk about what it looks like to have disengaged employees, and then you would really have some serious problems and say, shouldn't we solve these? Because it's a leadership challenge as well, if you ask me.
Yeah, good point, Nikolai.
Yeah, it's a great point, Nikolai, because, it goes into the heart of managing risk. And it's obviously, we talk about people risk and also business risk as well. So, yeah, it's a very, very good point there, Nikolai. Ellie, I think for the sake of time, we probably only have one more question.
Perhaps?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so maybe one more question to go. How do you deal with low participation in the engagement survey itself, and what would this typically be an indicator of?
I can jump in there if you'd like. Usually what I've found is for participation, first of all, you have to have effective communication. You've got to get the word out to people so everybody knows what's happening, but also the importance of doing it. And so a lot of companies will sort of take the position of, your voice matters. We want to, hit the things that are most important to you. I think also, the fact that we're measuring engagement and enablement, what we're doing is trying to make people's jobs easier and more motivating and all of those things. So if we can convince people first about the importance of the survey. Now, in the practical sense, you can communicate. Sometimes people say, well, we're busy, we can't get to it, etc. One thing that works often is to kind of create a sense of competition. So when the survey is live, you can track participation rates department by department. And so if you can go back to your managers and say, look, only 10% of your people have participated in the survey. You're not going to get a survey report for your department unless you get that participation rate up. Or even if you take the participation rates by department and you post them in a public area or several public areas and kind of create a competition, see who can get to 100% first. See what percentage, and some companies put up a visual of a thermometer, that kind of thing. So having that sense of competition and feeding back where you are on participation usually helps.
That's a good point. This is also, I'll add to that, Brent. I think one of the learnings we did was we spent some time a month ahead from the survey, start to communicate what actions have been taken, so people could believe in that we would act on the results. Even though we did that, we still have people believing that we didn't do enough. And I think no matter what you do, you need to underline the importance of communication here. And I guess it's both it's pre, during, and post survey that's really built the credibility also in terms of how it's addressed, and also the stories about what the organization has experienced that will help deal with whether the people actually believe that it's enough to build engagement. But good point as well, Brent.
Thanks, Nikolai.
Thank you, Brent and Nikolai. Looks like we're out of time now. Nonetheless, participants, please feel free to forward any questions that we were unable to cover today, or any requests that you may have for additional information using our post-event survey. My colleagues will actually reach out to you in response directly. Thank you again for joining us today, and have a lovely week ahead. Thank you.